Every business, regardless of what the business is, will be an AI business. So you have no option but to learn AI because it will be all over you, whether in your daily life or at work. But we as citizens should set the ethical guardrails to use AI responsibly.
Welcome to AI Council Code. I'm your host, Maggie Welsh, and today we have a very special podcast for you. I'm joined by Sanjoy Paul, who's an Associate Vice President for Technology Incubation and Commercialization at Rice University and Executive Director of Rice Nexus. So stay tuned for some interesting insights.
Baker Botts, LLP, provides podcasts for educational purposes only. They are not legal advice and are not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship. This communication may constitute attorney advertising.
Hi, Dr. Paul. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Maggie, for the warm introduction.
So, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and your role at Rice University?
I'm currently serving as the inaugural executive director of Rice Nexus. And Rice Nexus is a university-wide innovation incubator at Rice University. This was established to help transform breakthrough ideas from faculty, students, and alums into scalable commercial ventures with real-world impact. So today we host 22 startups across health, sports, space, energy, engineering, enterprise technologies, and AI. We have 3 venture capital firms, a legal partner, and a growing network of mentors and seasoned industry leaders and successful entrepreneurs. And a key part of my role is also to strengthen the relationship between industry and academia. So I bring complex real-world problems from the industry into the university and work with the faculty and students to solve those problems. And prior to joining Rice University, I spent over 30 years in the industry. I began with 12 years in core R&D at Bell Labs after my PhD, where I had the privilege of working with the most brilliant minds in the universe. And then spent 8 years in entrepreneurship and startups, and then followed by 12 years in consulting, including 8 years at Accenture, supporting clients across software, technology, manufacturing, energy, and health sectors. And I also worked with different universities, including Stanford, UC Berkeley, Oxford University, Rice, Rutgers, and Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. It's been a deeply rewarding journey, and I'm especially grateful to now being in a role where I can help connect research, entrepreneurship, and industry.
So you've said you've led R&D innovation and now you're driving university commercialization. So what's the biggest mind shift between those two roles?
When I was in industry, it's not enough just to show that something works. You have to prove that it can survive the worst situations. Whereas in academia, when you are doing research, your goal is to show that it works. It has high accuracy. But in academia, success is often about novelty and insight. But in industry, it is judged by whether it can scale, whether it can integrate and deliver value under real constraints of budget, timelines, customers, and other risks. So typically, the operational mindset that we get in industry is missing in academia, and that is we are trying to bridge that through commercialization in academia.
And I know you've worked a lot with AI startups and AI innovation. So when we're talking about the AI innovation ecosystem, what roles do universities and what role does Rice University play in that?
Industry is typically a very short-term focus. It's like it's speed and quick impact. That's what industry is. But when I look at university should play a long-term role, and it should explore foundational ideas. It should challenge assumptions, and it should train talents and who can work beyond the current hype cycle. So essentially, the other big advantage that universities have that industry does not is university can bring together all the constituents of the ecosystem. It can bring together startups, the incumbents, the policymakers, like in Rice has Baker Institute, through that we have policymakers coming in, the communities, we have Kinder Institute through which communities come in. So Rice can bring in all these different constituents. So Rice Nexus can bring in startups. Then through our Office of Relationships with the industry, we can bring in incumbents. Through Baker Institute, we can bring policymakers. Through the Kinder Institute, we can bring the community, so we can bring all the constituents of the ecosystem in a way that no single companies can. So I think that universities' perspective also, we can de-risk the early ideas early, and we can produce people innovate across various generations of technology. So there's a clear role for university to play in the AI ecosystem.
You mentioned de-risking early, and I'm sure you see a lot of AI research that might not always be ready for commercialization. So, how do you know what is ready for commercialization? What might be a deployable system that's worth investing in?
We run into this issue all the time because at Rice Nexus, there are a lot of startups which apply to be part of Rice Nexus. And we have to use some criteria to decide whether that startup has a chance of success. And coming from the industry, what we look for is when the startups come in, do they really understand the messiness of the real world? It's not just, hey, I have a very accurate system, it has the best model, but you know, do you understand the edge cases? Do you understand, what happens with the data drifts? What happens the model drifts? How to integrate with the existing workflows? Do you understand the failure modes? Unless you clearly understand who will use your system and when they will use and why they will use the system, then you won't succeed. So we look for those clear understanding of who the customer is and when and why they should use the value proposition. And then also we try to understand whether they understand the real world is very messy. There are a lot of complexities in real life. And whether the system will scale, they understand the survivability, resilience of the system in the real world and the messiness of the real world. Who have those understanding, the chances of them being successful is higher.
So, is it often then not necessarily the AI product that is the common failure point, but maybe the people or the engineers that are working on the AI product to understand its deployment and its different use cases?
That you're absolutely right. It's not the technology which is the failure point. In fact, I've seen some of the best technologies and most accurate, most stringently done technology. They fail because you don't understand how to apply it in the real world. Even if you have a system which works in proof of concept, when you take to real life, then you have to questions of security comes in, question of legal comes in, question of compliance comes in. And if you have not thought through those things, if you try to bolt it on later on, it does not work. So those who actually think through the systems in a holistic way from the very beginning, they succeed. So essentially, the failure point, as you rightly pointed out, is not the technology. Failure point is the people, their understanding of the real world messiness. And that's where the failure happens.
So you mentioned an interesting point, which is with AI commercialization, there's a lot of expectations around legal, safety, privacy. How do you bake in those responsibilities and those guardrails into an AI system without slowing down the innovation or the commercialization process?
Yeah, this is also an excellent point. I was in a panel discussion in Southwest TechCon in Austin last week, in fact. And this point cropped up and saying that if you try to do security, if you try to bake in all the security things, then the innovation slows down. So my point there was that it's not about whether speed or security. It has to be speed and security. Both of them have to go hand in hand. And the way that has to be done is security should be baked in from the get-go in the design itself. Security and the guardrails should be before you start building the system. Security and guardrails should be when you are building the system, and it should be at the deployment time. So what I mean by that is you bake in the security before you build. That is, the platform will not allow you to write code which will violate the guardrails. Second of all, at the coding time, when you're coding, if you code something which is insecure, the system should prompt you saying, hey, this is actually insecure. Alternative way of coding this. So security assistant is helping you. So it's not slowing you down. It's just giving you ideas and recommendations as to how to do it. And then at the deployment time, you should have a system which will continuously monitor to see that if the system is drifting, if the system is going beyond the guardrails, and things like that. And also, I mentioned one thing at that workshop, I'd like to mention it here, that when people talk about guardrails, they think of static guardrails, but guardrails cannot be static. They also have to be dynamic. They have to be context dependent. So if you have those things baked in the design And then also, you should have a clear boundary of where AI starts and where the decision points between humans and the AI. Where does the human come into the loop for controls and continuous monitoring from the start? That should be done in order for these AI systems to be successful.
So it's really through the whole life cycle of the AI system, thinking about these issues early on and then updating and monitoring them as deployment and commercialization happens.
Absolutely right. Yes.
So there's a lot of industry funding going into AI research right now. As industry funding for AI research grows, how are universities adapting to that investment? Are universities maintaining open science, or is there more partnerships with industry happening?
I'm right in the middle of that. And especially the last year, I've seen that significant amount of government funding has been cut. So as a result, the traditional sources of funding that academia depends on, like in NIH, NSF, and other sources, they have been dried up quite a bit. So as a result, how do you support research? You have to depend on industry funding. So that's the role I was mentioning at Rice Nexus, among many other parts of Rice, who are working with industry to attract funding to support research of the faculty. And definitely there's a tension because industry expects speed and faster delivery, whereas academia is typically longer term. So there's a tension. Industry funding does bring relevance and resources, but it can also narrow the scope of inquiry and reduce the openness. But I believe that if things are done right, is hybrid model is possible. That one of the engagements that I'm trying to do with industry and faculty is industry has a scope but is broad enough, and faculty has enough maneuvering ability there. So where the fundamental foundational work remains open, but the applied layers are commercialized responsibly with the help of the industry. So there's a tension, but I think that academic members are coming to realize that there is a fine balance that they could still have the work open, but still there is some accountability end of the day with deliverables that the industry expects.
And I know that you're very connected with the local Houston community and Houston AI. So why don't you tell me a little bit about Houston AI and why Houston is so uniquely positioned in this AI innovation landscape?
Yeah, I get asked this question all the time. So I'm one of the co-founders of Houston AI, and I have several other co-founders, and they're all accomplished people. The one goal of Houston AI is to establish Houston as a hub of AI or superpower of AI in the country. And then people keep saying, Sanjoy, are you serious that Houston and AI? And then I say, yes, I'm serious. And the reason I justify Houston to be one of the superpowers in AI, and I'm getting more and more convinced, although I'm not a Houston native, I spent most of my life in the East Coast and some part in the West Coast and Houston for about 10 years now. But then the more I see in Houston, the depth of knowledge in the domains is amazing. When I talk to people in the field of energy, when I talk to the doctors in the medical center, when I talk to the astronauts in the space industry, the depth of knowledge that these people have is absolutely amazing. And I have not seen that, in spite of my exposure in the industry for 30 years, I have not seen such depth of knowledge that these people in Houston have. So I believe that while people talk about AI in my mind is essentially a tool. This AI by itself is not useful. The way it becomes useful is if it helps solve some of the most difficult problems in the industry. But who are in the best position to define the problems in the industry? The domain experts themselves. The energy experts, they know what the problems are. The medical experts know what the problems are. The space expert, a doctor who treats, who's actually in charge of astronauts in space, or somebody who's doing the space operations, they know exactly what the problems are. And then people like us who with the AI background comes and says, hey, I know that how I can apply AI to solve these problems. So essentially, Houston is very unique in the sense that it's positioned at the intersection of domain and AI, and domain becoming being the main thing in the industry. I'm hoping that there's some unicorn startups coming up in Houston at the intersection of domain and AI that no other city in the United States or in anywhere in the world can replicate. And that's the power of Houston. The other thing that we are working very closely with City Council and in partnership with Houston City College and the University of Houston, Thai Houston, and the different organizations is trying to upskill the population of Houston and making them AI literate, AI trained. And in fact, there's a huge gap in the demand for people who want to be AI trained and the amount of education which is available. We want to make sure we democratize AI. AI should not be limited to being an AI should be for everybody. AI should be at scale. And Houston AI is into that mission, working alongside multiple partners to upskill the people in Houston so that when we need people in Houston to be AI trained, because every business will be AI business, every business will need AI people. So why do we have to import people from other states? People locally should be able to meet all the requirements, all the needs of Houston industries. And I think that's another objectives of Houston AI is to upskill the people so that everybody in Houston can take advantage and the socioeconomic status goes up for everyone in the city.
Well, that's great. And I wish you the best of luck. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners or any final comments?
I think this is a very interesting time. I'll make the 3 points. First of all, every business, regardless of what the business is, will be an AI business. So you have no option but to learn AI. And there is so much information on the net that you could learn AI from. And then there'll be organizational Houston AI who will start putting curated content that you take advantage of that. So you have no choice but to learn AI because that will be your front, center, and behind you all over you, whether in your daily life or at work, AI will be necessary. But at the same time, it's important for people to understand that there are things what AI should do and what AI should not do. As a technology can do many things, but we humans are responsible to use it ethically. So the technology has the ability to do good things and bad things. But we, as individuals, as citizens, we should have the ethical mindset, the guardrails that how we should use AI and how we should not use AI. So that ethics, ethical guidelines, governance, and these kind of things are becoming paramount in using AI. Although everybody should use AI, but use it responsibly.
Well, thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate you sharing your insights, Dr. Paul, and we hope to have you back on the podcast soon. And thank you to our listeners for joining AI Council Code today. We're so glad that you joined us.
Thank you, Maggie. And I really enjoyed the conversation with you.
Thank you for listening to this BakerBots podcast. BakerBots has the experience, knowledge, and people to address our clients' most significant legal issues. For more information on BakerBots practices, please visit us at bakerbots.com. This presentation is provided by BakerBots LLP for educational and informational purposes only. It is not legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship. Under the rules of certain jurisdictions, this communication may constitute attorney advertising.